Rome's strongest man walked into Egypt chasing his enemy. Egypt's smartest ruler walked into Rome's strongest man, offering something more valuable than love, a kingdom that could keep Rome fed, funded, and stable, if Julius Caesar kept Cleopatra alive. Here's the part most people miss. Cleopatra and Julius Caesar didn't meet. Cleopatra and Julius Caesar negotiated. Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria in 48 BCE, and within days Egypt turned into a trap. Rival factions, angry crowds, unpaid soldiers, and a royal family that treated murder like politics. Cleopatra had been pushed out of power by her brother's court. Julius Caesar was chasing the remnants of a Roman civil war that had already ripped the Republic apart. Both needed a miracle. So Cleopatra and Julius Caesar built one by trading exactly what the other side lacked. Stay to the end, because once you see what Cleopatra and Julius Caesar really traded, the famous romance starts looking like a political contract, and a dangerously effective one. To understand the bargain, you have to see the pressure on both sides. Egypt looked like the jackpot: gold, taxes, ports, and the Nile feeding an agricultural engine that could pump out grain year after year. But under the surface, Egypt was a knife fight. The Ptolemaic dynasty, Cleopatra's family, was Greek Macedonian in origin, ruling over an Egyptian majority through a complicated blend of Greek court politics and Egyptian religious legitimacy. That court was famous for sibling rivalries that ended in exile or death, advisors who played kings like puppets, constant fear of coups, the awkward truth that Egypt's independence depended on Rome's mood. Cleopatra didn't inherit a stable throne. Cleopatra inherited a throne with termites. Rome had legions. Rome also had something more dangerous than enemies: internal collapse. By the time Julius Caesar reached Egypt, Rome had just lived through years of faction violence in the streets, political assassinations, generals turning armies into personal property, a civil war between Julius Caesar and Pompey. In that environment, Julius Caesar didn't only need military victory. Julius Caesar needed money to pay troops legitimacy, to keep Roman elites from revolting grain, to keep the city calm, and a clean ending that made Julius Caesar look like the restorer of order, not just another warlord. Now drop Julius Caesar into Egypt, where one wrong move could light Alexandria on fire. That's when the deal becomes inevitable. Pompey fled to Egypt expecting safety. Instead, Pompey was killed on the shore, murdered by men who believed they were doing Julius Caesar a favor. If that sounds like a smart gift, it wasn't. It was political gasoline. Julius Caesar didn't want Pompey's head as a trophy. Julius Caesar wanted Pompey alive enough to parade, forgive, and use as proof that Julius Caesar was merciful. So when Julius Caesar arrived and saw what Egypt's court had done, Julius Caesar didn't smile. Julius Caesar got angry, and that anger mattered because it instantly showed Cleopatra something critical. Julius Caesar wasn't here to be managed like a tourist. Julius Caesar intended to control outcomes. Meanwhile, Alexandria, already tense, became a boiling pot. Egyptian resentment against Greek elites, Greek fear of losing privilege, Roman soldiers in the city, rival factions shouting that Julius Caesar had no right to judge Egyptian politics. Julius Caesar tried to mediate the royal conflict. The royal conflict tried to swallow Julius Caesar. This is the moment Cleopatra moved. You've heard the story. Cleopatra smuggled into the palace, rolled in a rug or wrapped in linen, appearing before Julius Caesar like a plot twist. Whether it was a carpet, a sack, or a blanket, the point isn't the fabric. The point is the tactic. Cleopatra didn't arrive like a queen asking permission. Cleopatra arrived like a player, forcing a meeting on her terms, bypassing the advisors who had locked her out of power. It was a political infiltration, not a flirtation. Cleopatra understood the problem in the room. Julius Caesar needed order. Cleopatra needed legitimacy. Cleopatra's rivals needed Julius Caesar gone or controlled. So Cleopatra offered Julius Caesar a deal that sounded like stability. And Julius Caesar, who could smell chaos, listened. Let's be blunt. Cleopatra didn't have what Julius Caesar lacked by accident. Cleopatra had the exact resources Rome's civil war had made priceless. Wars are expensive. Civil wars are worse. Julius Caesar's troops expected pay, rewards, and security. Even victorious armies can turn into angry mobs if a leader can't finance them. Egypt had money, and more importantly, Egypt had a system for extracting wealth, taxation, customs, and state control of key resources. Cleopatra's offer, in practical terms, immediate funds to stabilize Julius Caesar's position, access to Egypt's treasury, directly or indirectly, financial credibility. Julius Caesar could act like the state still worked. This wasn't charity. This was Cleopatra buying protection with the most reliable currency in politics. Resources. Rome's stability was tied to food. A shortage could cause riots. A panic could spark political violence. Egypt's grain shipments weren't just nice to have. Egypt's grain shipments were a safety cable. Cleopatra could offer Julius Caesar a stable Egypt capable of producing and exporting grain, a friendly Alexandria that didn't sabotage shipments, predictable supply that made Julius Caesar look like a competent leader. Cleopatra's leverage wasn't, "I will starve Rome." Cleopatra's leverage was, "I can keep Rome calm while you rebuild control." That is the kind of promise a politician hears like music. Cleopatra didn't only need military help, Cleopatra needed recognition. If Julius Caesar publicly recognized Cleopatra as the rightful ruler, Cleopatra's enemies inside Egypt lost their strongest argument. So Cleopatra offered something in return: legitimacy of a different kind. Cleopatra could present Julius Caesar as the arbiter who restored order, the power strong enough to settle disputes, the Roman leader with the authority to fix Egypt. To Roman audiences, Julius Caesar could spin it as responsible leadership. To Egyptian audiences, Cleopatra could spin it as divine-backed restoration. Both sides got a story that made them look strong. Egypt wasn't just rich. Egypt was positioned perfectly. From Alexandria, Julius Caesar gained a strategic base in the eastern Mediterranean, naval access, proximity to other eastern kingdoms and markets, a platform to communicate power across the region. In civil war terms, that matters, because Julius Caesar wasn't only fighting battles. Julius Caesar was building a world where people stopped betting against him. Cleopatra brought the resources. Julius Caesar brought the thing Cleopatra could not manufacture: Roman force and Roman recognition. Cleopatra's claim alone wasn't enough. Her brother's faction had soldiers. The palace had commanders. The city could be turned into a riot. Julius Caesar provided disciplined Roman troops, command experience in chaos, the ability to hold key positions in Alexandria, the threat that made Egyptian rivals hesitate. Even when outnumbered at points, Roman troops were a psychological weapon. They signaled, "Rome is invested here." Cleopatra needed that signal. In a dynastic crisis, legitimacy is everything. Julius Caesar, as Rome's dominant leader, could publicly decide who counted. Julius Caesar's recognition did several things at once: declared Cleopatra's rule lawful, in the eyes of Rome, pressured Egyptian elites to fall in line, framed Cleopatra as the stabilizing partner, not the rebel. This mattered later too, because Roman approval could determine whether Egypt was treated as ally or prey. Cleopatra didn't need Julius Caesar to fight every Egyptian. Cleopatra needed Julius Caesar to neutralize the faction blocking her. That meant dealing with advisors who controlled her brother, commanders who resisted Cleopatra, political operators who wanted a puppet throne. Julius Caesar's involvement, military and diplomatic, helped break that blockade. In modern terms, Julius Caesar didn't give Cleopatra power. Julius Caesar helped Cleopatra regain power by changing the balance of fear. This is the part that proves the deal wasn't fantasy. Once Julius Caesar supported Cleopatra, the other side reacted like any threatened regime. They tried to trap him. Alexandria erupted into a conflict that modern viewers would recognize as urban warfare. Crowds, barricades, naval fights in the harbor, supply shortages, shifting loyalties. At several points, Julius Caesar's forces were under serious pressure. Cleopatra's position was not guaranteed. The deal had to survive real danger. And it did, because both sides kept paying their side of the bargain. Julius Caesar kept fighting to stabilize Egypt. Cleopatra kept providing resources and political support to make the fight sustainable. This is what alliances are, not promises, but constant performance. Eventually, Cleopatra returned to the throne. The settlement in practice looked like this: Cleopatra recognized as ruler, often formally co-ruling with a younger brother in name. Cleopatra's rival faction removed or defeated Rome positioned as the deciding force in Egyptian politics. Egypt stabilized enough to continue functioning as a critical supplier, and ally Julius Caesar didn't annex Egypt then. That wasn't the play. Yet, Julius Caesar wanted a cooperative Egypt that didn't require occupation. Occupation costs money and creates resistance. A friendly ruler is cheaper. Cleopatra understood this and leaned into it. Here's the simplest reason the alliance worked. Cleopatra and Julius Caesar wanted the same thing at the same time. Not love, control. Cleopatra wanted the throne, stability, and survival. Julius Caesar wanted money, order, and a reliable Eastern partner. Their incentives matched, and their skills complemented each other. Cleopatra's strength was systems and persuasion. Julius Caesar's strength was speed and force. Together, they could solve a crisis neither could solve alone. Every great deal has a hidden clause: optics. Cleopatra needed Egyptians to see Cleopatra as legitimate, not a Roman puppet. Julius Caesar needed Romans to see Julius Caesar as disciplined, not captured by a foreign court. So both sides managed the image carefully. Cleopatra used Egyptian religious symbolism to anchor rule at home. Julius Caesar framed the intervention as restoring order and justice. But there was a problem. Rome was already suspicious of kings. Rome was even more suspicious of powerful women, and Rome was full of rivals who would weaponize gossip. That means the alliance, while effective, was politically flammable. And that brings us to the part of the deal nobody could control: Rome's internal politics. Julius Caesar didn't walk into Alexandria empty-handed. Julius Caesar walked in holding something that looked boring but functioned like a weapon: paperwork. Cleopatra's father, Ptolemy XII, had leaned on Rome for support and left behind a massive debt and a political promise. In simple terms, Egypt had been paying for Roman protection, and Rome had been happy to take the money. So Julius Caesar could present his intervention as legal in Roman terms. Julius Caesar was enforcing an agreement Rome already recognized. Julius Caesar was collecting what Egypt owed. Julius Caesar was restoring a stable order that served everyone. That's important because Julius Caesar didn't want to look like a conqueror in public. Julius Caesar wanted to look like a referee who just happened to be carrying a sword. Cleopatra understood the value of that cover story. Cleopatra didn't want to be seen as a puppet. Cleopatra wanted to be seen as the rightful ruler, whose rights Rome had confirmed. So the deal had a legal mask that both sides could wear. Cleopatra's enemies didn't only have soldiers. Cleopatra's enemies had a court system designed to make the queen disappear. If Cleopatra stayed unofficial, Cleopatra could be replaced by paperwork, ceremony, and controlled access. So Cleopatra needed something loud and undeniable, a public endorsement from Rome's most powerful living Roman. When Julius Caesar recognized Cleopatra, it wasn't only a nice gesture, it was a signal to every player in Egypt: betting against Cleopatra is betting against Julius Caesar. In palace politics, that's the sound of doors unlocking. From Julius Caesar's perspective, Egypt was not the main event. Pompey's supporters were still scattered. Rome was still politically unstable. Julius Caesar needed to finish a civil war and return home as the man who ended it. That meant Julius Caesar could not afford to get stuck in Egypt for years. So Julius Caesar needed Cleopatra to deliver something specific: fast stability. Not eventually, Sheshinam, not after another decade of palace drama. Fast. Cleopatra had to prove Cleopatra could govern. Cleopatra could keep Alexandria quiet enough to function. Cleopatra could keep the grain and money pipelines working. Cleopatra could prevent Egypt from becoming a permanent Roman headache. This is where Cleopatra's administrative talent mattered, because a deal like this collapses if the client city burns. Julius Caesar wasn't operating in a vacuum. Back in Rome, senators were tracking rumors like accountants track debt. Every extra month in Egypt created political risk. Rivals could claim Julius Caesar was distracted. Opponents could whisper king again. Soldiers elsewhere could rally under another banner. Rome's capital could spiral if grain deliveries felt uncertain. So Julius Caesar's timeline mattered. Julius Caesar needed Egypt stabilized quickly, not only to help Cleopatra, but to protect Julius Caesar's own legitimacy. A leader can win every battle and still lose politics at home. That pressure shaped the deal. It pushed Julius Caesar toward the fastest path to order: back the most capable claimant, end the palace war, secure the money and grain, then leave. Cleopatra offered speed, Cleopatra offered competence, and Julius Caesar could not afford anything else. Here's a detail that sounds boring until you realize it was political armor. When Cleopatra returned to power, Cleopatra was often presented as ruling alongside a younger brother in name. That wasn't just family tradition, that was part of the stability package. Why? Because Egypt's court had factions that needed different stories. Greek elites wanted continuity with the dynasty and its familiar rituals. Egyptian priests wanted a pharaoh who respected temples and legitimacy. Roman observers wanted a clean, order-restored outcome that didn't look like Rome installing a lone revolutionary. A co-ruler arrangement gave everyone a story to swallow. Cleopatra likely understood the advantage immediately. Let the paperwork say shared rule, while the real decisions ran through the queen. It's not deception for fun. It's how you prevent a fragile country from cracking in half. And for Julius Caesar, the co-ruler optics solved another issue. Julius Caesar could claim Julius Caesar was not crowning a new monarch from scratch. Julius Caesar was upholding the dynasty and enforcing a recognized settlement. That's what political cover looks like in the ancient world. Here's the uncomfortable reason Julius Caesar leaned toward Cleopatra. Cleopatra was the least unstable option. Cleopatra had three advantages Rome couldn't ignore. Many Ptolemaic rulers lived in a Greek bubble. Cleopatra cultivated a broader base. Ancient sources credit Cleopatra with speaking multiple languages, and Cleopatra was famous for presenting herself as an Egyptian-style ruler, not only a Greek queen. That meant Cleopatra could anchor legitimacy through priestly support, religious symbolism, public rituals that made rule feel familiar to Egyptians. A ruler who can speak to the population is harder to topple. Rome preferred hard to topple. Some rulers beg, some rulers stall, some rulers panic. Cleopatra negotiated. Cleopatra offered value, demanded terms, and moved quickly. To a Roman like Julius Caesar, that isn't just impressive, that's useful. Cleopatra wasn't playing for influence. Cleopatra was playing for survival. That kind of stake makes a partner reliable in the short term. Cleopatra couldn't afford to drift. Julius Caesar could trust that Cleopatra would fight for the deal because Cleopatra's life depended on it. Let's be honest, even if Cleopatra and Julius Caesar had genuine personal chemistry, the alliance would still have needed a public story. In Rome, the official story sounded like, "I restored order in Egypt, secured Rome's interests, and upheld justice." In Egypt, the official story sounded like, "The rightful ruler has returned, protected by fate and divine legitimacy." Notice what neither story says: "I did it for love," because love is unstable. Order is respectable. Both sides wrap the deal in respectability. Roman politics had one nuclear button: the fear of kings. Romans told themselves the Republic existed because Rome had expelled kings long ago. Even when Rome acted like an empire, king was the insult you used to justify violence. Julius Caesar already faced suspicion because Julius Caesar held extraordinary power. Julius Caesar already had enemies whispering, "Julius Caesar wants to be a monarch." Now picture how Cleopatra looked in that environment. A queen from a rich eastern kingdom living in luxury, allied with Rome's strongest man. If Julius Caesar looked too close to Cleopatra, Julius Caesar looked too close to monarchy. So Julius Caesar had to manage optics carefully, and Cleopatra had to manage them even more carefully, because the easiest way to attack Cleopatra in Rome was to reduce Cleopatra to a stereotype. This is where the deal begins to develop its long-term weakness. After Egypt stabilized, Cleopatra later traveled to Rome and stayed there for a time. That visit is often framed as scandal, but politically the visit makes sense. Cleopatra in Rome achieved several things at once. Cleopatra stayed close to Julius Caesar's decision-making center. Cleopatra protected the alliance from being rewritten by Roman rivals. Cleopatra signaled to other powers. Egypt is backed by Rome's top man. Cleopatra gathered intelligence simply by being present. Rome was a city where everything important happened through informal access. Who you could see Who could whisper to you? Who could delay your request? Cleopatra understood access, and in Rome, Cleopatra's mere presence created panic among certain elites. Not because Cleopatra was casting a spell, because Cleopatra represented an alternative power center inside Rome's orbit. Even if Julius Caesar tried to keep it quiet, the symbolism was loud. There's a story that Julius Caesar placed a statue of Cleopatra in a Roman temple associated with Julius Caesar's family line. Whether every detail is remembered perfectly by later writers, the point is still real. Symbols matter. A statue is a message, and in Rome's political language, the message sounded like, "This queen is legitimate. This alliance is permanent. This is not a random foreign visitor." To Julius Caesar, that could look like confidence. To Julius Caesar's enemies, that could look like monarchy creeping in through the back door. The deal was working in reality, but the optics were getting dangerous. People sometimes describe the Alexandrian fighting like it was background noise. It wasn't. Alexandria was one of the great cities of the world, dense, proud, and explosive. When civil conflict hit a city like that, everything becomes hard. Streets become choke points, crowds become weapons, food becomes strategy, and rumors can move faster than troops. Julius Caesar's forces were not always comfortable there. At moments, Julius Caesar was short on supplies and boxed into limited space. That's why Cleopatra's contribution mattered beyond support. If Cleopatra could keep parts of the city cooperating, ports functioning, officials working, money moving, then Julius Caesar could stay in the fight long enough for reinforcements and momentum to swing the outcome. In other words, Cleopatra wasn't just the prize. Cleopatra was part of the operational solution. That is a political alliance behaving like a military asset. Here's why the deal held together while both were alive. Each side could enforce the other. Cleopatra could enforce Julius Caesar's interests by keeping Egypt stable and productive. If Cleopatra failed, Julius Caesar lost money, grain reliability, and political credibility. Julius Caesar could enforce Cleopatra's rule by making it clear that challengers would face Rome's force. If Julius Caesar withdrew support too soon, Cleopatra risked being overthrown, and the whole arrangement collapsing into chaos. It's like two people holding a bridge from opposite ends. If either lets go, both fall. That mutual dependence is why the alliance was so strong in the short term. The deal wasn't only between Cleopatra and Julius Caesar, the deal had a third party with knives, Rome's ruling class. Cleopatra and Julius Caesar could align interests perfectly, and it still wouldn't matter if Rome's elite decided Julius Caesar had gone too far. In Rome, the danger wasn't only military defeat, the danger was assassination, and Julius Caesar's enemies had motives that had nothing to do with Cleopatra: fear of dictatorship, loss of senatorial power, personal rivalries, ideology, and pure ego. Cleopatra's alliance didn't create those motives, but Cleopatra's alliance gave enemies a new symbol to attack. That's not fair, but politics isn't fair. Every alliance built around one person has the same flaw. It can die in a single day. When Julius Caesar was assassinated in 44 BCE, the deal didn't end. The deal evaporated because the deal wasn't fully institutional. It wasn't anchored in a stable Roman government. It wasn't protected by a long-term treaty guaranteed by a calm Senate. It was protected by Julius Caesar being alive. Once Julius Caesar was gone, Cleopatra faced an immediate problem. Cleopatra still ruled Egypt. Cleopatra still controlled grain and money. Cleopatra still had political value, but Cleopatra had lost the one Roman figure powerful enough to defend Cleopatra's legitimacy inside Rome. In a way, Cleopatra suddenly became what Rome's elite feared most: a foreign monarch with resources and influence, without a single Roman protector controlling the narrative. Even after Julius Caesar's death, the alliance had already paid off for Cleopatra in ways that mattered. Cleopatra regained the throne and eliminated immediate rivals. Cleopatra secured a period of stability that allowed Egypt to recover. Cleopatra demonstrated that Egypt could negotiate with Rome at the highest level. Cleopatra established a global reputation as a serious political actor, not a passive client. And perhaps most importantly, Cleopatra learned how Rome actually worked, not the speeches, the machinery. That knowledge shaped Cleopatra's later decisions with Mark Antony and the coming conflict with Octavian. Julius Caesar gained tangible wins. Money at the moment Julius Caesar needed it most stability in Egypt without expensive occupation. A calmer grain outlook that reduced risk in Rome, a powerful symbol of Julius Caesar as kingmaker and restorer of order. A strategic eastern platform during a chaotic political era, the alliance helped Julius Caesar do what Julius Caesar was trying to do at the highest level, turn victory into governance. This is the core lesson. Cleopatra and Julius Caesar didn't bond. Cleopatra and Julius Caesar solved each other's emergencies. Julius Caesar needed cash legitimacy, stability, a quick resolution in Egypt. Cleopatra needed Roman recognition, military backing, removal of the faction that had pushed Cleopatra out, time to rebuild internal control. The overlap was perfect, the timing was perfect, and both were unusually capable. Most alliances fail because goals don't match, partners don't trust each other, or the costs are too high. This one worked because the costs of not allying were higher. Without Julius Caesar, Cleopatra likely loses the throne. Without Cleopatra, Julius Caesar risks Egypt collapsing into a chaotic mess during Rome's fragile moment. So both chose the rational option. Even at its strongest, the deal had an expiration date, because Cleopatra's long-term goal and Julius Caesar's long-term goal could never be identical. Cleopatra ultimately needed Egypt to remain sovereign. Julius Caesar ultimately needed Rome to dominate the Mediterranean without rivals. Those goals can align for a season, they can't align forever. The alliance was a bridge over a crisis, not a permanent merger. And Rome's culture made permanent partnership even harder. Rome hated kings, feared queens, and distrusted any outside influence. That paranoia didn't come from Cleopatra. That paranoia was the Republic's bloodstream. After Julius Caesar died, Rome rewrote the story. It became easier to tell people Julius Caesar was distracted, Julius Caesar was tempted, Cleopatra was a seductress. Because if the truth is that Julius Caesar made a rational alliance, then Cleopatra looks competent, and competence is threatening. So propaganda did what propaganda always does. It turned strategy into scandal. The deal was buried under gossip. But the deal mattered more than the gossip, because the deal stabilized Egypt, affected Rome's politics, and set the stage for the final power struggle that produced Augustus. The real Cleopatra and Julius Caesar deal was not a love story. It was a trade. Cleopatra traded money, grain stability, and a functioning kingdom at the exact moment Rome was fragile. Julius Caesar traded military force, political recognition, and the authority to break Cleopatra's rivals. It worked because both sides needed it right then. It lasted because both could enforce it. And it ended because the deal relied on one man surviving Roman knives. So if you want to remember this alliance correctly, remember it like this: not a romance that accidentally changed history. A contract that did exactly what it was designed to do until the world changed around it. Now that you've seen the deal Cleopatra made with Caesar, watch how Cleopatra built a goddess brand on purpose and used it like a political weapon.